as always, by 11 Warriors Deputy Editor Dan Hope and 11 Warriors reporter Andy Anders. Guys, it's another Sunday, and we're talking about another Ohio State win. Ohio State beat Purdue on Saturday in West Lafayette 34-10. You two were on the road in Indiana, made the drive there on Friday, came back on Saturday. I'm curious, I don't know how many of the Big Ten stadiums that you've been to, but where would Ross-Ade Stadium rank among your favorites, Dan, over your years of covering Ohio State? How many trips have you made there, and what's been your overall experience?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a pretty forgettable stadium, to be honest. I mean, I don't feel like there's anything that really sticks out about it. Like, I think, there was some talk about that last week. People were kind of asking Ryan Day, what makes Ross-Ade Stadium such a tough place to play because of the record that Ohio State has had there, in the 21st century, and a record that has now been evened up with yesterday's result. But I don't really feel like there's anything super spectacular about it that really makes it stand out. I mean, yesterday, Ohio State fans had to be at least 40% of the stadium. There was a lot of scarlet in the stands. So I think Ohio State fans did a good job of kind of neutralizing the home environment yesterday.
Andy, have you been to Ross-Ade Stadium before? You might have been in 2023. Was that your only trip there before Saturday?
Andy, I believe you're muted.
Okay, don't know how
And
that
he's back.
happened. And I'm back. No, I've been to Ross-Ade 3 times now. I was there in 2018, my first year covering the team as an intern, unpaid intern there. When Ohio State lost, and everyone remembers that game there in 23 as well. This was my third time to Ross-Ade. I really like the press box view. I think there's a lot of woods and campus in the background when you're looking out from the press box, and it was really pretty on Saturday with all the fall colors, and the trees were all different shades of leaves. There was red and orange and yellow and green, and just all that really fall vibe to it. I would say though, relative to other Big Ten stadiums, yeah, it's probably in the bottom half. It's not nothing particularly special about the stadium itself. It's kind of standard. Um, yeah, kind of standard as far as just the atmosphere of it. Seeing the biggest, they call it the world's largest drum. I wonder if that's true. That the band has, and the train that runs out onto the field. That's always
train
cool
noise
and
does
stuff,
go hard.
But
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. You can even
I
hear
think
it
it's
through the TV broadcast.
certainly about 100 times better than the Wildcat screech, the Nittany Lion screech that they do at
That's
Penn
exactly
State.
what I was thinking.
That's just like nails on a chalkboard to me. But overall, yeah, I don't think I'd put it in my top half. And I've been to all but, I think, 4 Big Ten stadiums now. So, yeah.
I think with the question about whether Ross-Ade Stadium is a difficult place to play, what always comes to my mind is when Ohio State plays there, it always typically just is an overcast, pretty gray day where it just kind of feels like Ohio State is pretty tempted to come out sleepy. It was a little bit like that on Saturday. Okay, so we start the game with a Bo Jackson 75-yard touchdown, gets called back because of a Jeremiah Smith block in the back. If that would have stood, you would have said Ohio State came out of the gates running fast and never looked back. However, that first drive, because that play gets called back, Ohio State then eventually punts. They end up trailing 3-0 in this game. And away we go, what seems to be another kind of snoozer, sleepy game for Ohio State. It didn't end up that way, which I'm excited to talk about with you guys and your analysis of the game. But before I jump into that, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor of this show, as always, First Bank of Central Ohio. First Bank of Central Ohio is the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support business owners in Columbus. It's locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. So visit them at fbcentralohio.com. Okay, so we go from this game, or we go away from it, knowing that Ohio State had a 34-10 final score. There was a lot going on in college football on Saturday, particularly in the noon to 3:30 window. Yes, I am referencing Indiana and Penn State, so I don't even know if many Ohio State fans who weren't at Ross-Ade Stadium were really paying attention to the game as it was going on, considering Ohio State had the game much in its control. But I do still want to ask, Dan, if you had to give a 30,000 foot view assessment of this game for Ohio State, how would you do it? Kind of looking at the offense, defense, special teams. What did you take away from this game primarily?
Yeah, I think, Ohio State just kind of kept doing what it's been doing all year. It was another methodical, dominant win. Like you said, first quarter, because that run gets called back, did get off to a slower start than you'd like. But really, second quarter, the game was really kind of that quarter. Like Ohio State completely dominates the second quarter, takes a 24-3 lead into halftime. At that point, you knew they had the game well in hand. Not really the most exciting second half, I would say, but this game, even in the first quarter, this game was never in doubt. And I think, you juxtapose it with Indiana. We're talking about the teams that we've seen as the two top teams, not only in the Big Ten, but the entire country going into this past weekend. To see Indiana need that fourth quarter comeback to beat Penn State, whereas Ohio State, just keeps taking care of business. I mean, I keep going back to this stat in my mind. Ohio State has now won 8 straight games by at least 3 scores. So Ohio State isn't just unbeaten this year. They really haven't come close, because even the Texas game, Texas scores a late touchdown. Like that game, Texas never really threatened Ohio State in that game either until very late. And so Ohio State hasn't just won every game this season. It hasn't come close to being beaten. And maybe the offensive numbers aren't quite as exciting or spectacular as maybe, in terms of like 50 points a game as maybe you'd like to see. But this team just keeps taking care of business. I mean, when Ryan Day was asked about the identity of his team after the game on Saturday, he called it business-like. And I think that's an accurate description of what we've seen from this team. It's just week in and week out, this team takes care of business. Like I said, it'd be a tiny bit of a sleepy start, but like we haven't seen a sustained version of that from this team this year. Like every game, like we see them at some point just take over a game and pull away. And then, it helps having a dominant defense, but it's like once they pull away, they just kind of control the game from there. So I think this was just another continuation of that for Ohio State. And, I think, Andy and I were talking about it on After Carmen. It was like, it feels like we're kind of saying a lot of the same things about this team after this game as we've been saying after every game. Like, Julian Sayin's the best quarterback in the country. Jeremiah Smith's the best receiver in the country. Ohio State is the best defense in the country. Running game, offensive line are areas of concern. So I feel like I don't think my opinion of this team changed in any way based on this game, but that's not a bad thing because Ohio State was already the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, it seems like a takeaway from this game overall was just that Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith added to their Heisman campaigns. And so that's another thing I want to ask you. Andy, I'm going to go to you first and give probably the candidate that all 3 of us would pick as being the likeliest to hoist the Stiff Arm Trophy in New York, and that being Julian Sayin. He completed 27 of 33 passes against Purdue for 303 yards, a touchdown, and an uncharacteristic interception, just his 4th of the year. However, it seems still that this performance was enough to continue building the momentum, especially given few of the throws that he had in this game that were just throws that maybe no other quarterback in the country can make. That Julian Sayin is Ohio State's primary candidate to win the Heisman Trophy. Now you've seen 9 games of Julian Sayin as the starting quarterback, Andy. What is your case that you would make for him to win the Heisman Trophy this season?
Well, I think he's just been far and away the best at his position, the best quarterback in college football, running the best, what I would say, even though maybe not statistically, but the best passing offense in college football. It is like one of the most efficient passing offenses in college football. If you look at total numbers, it might not rank above the best because they're not playing as many plays. They're not, the methodical pace and all of that. They're not having as many bites at the apple. They're trying to establish the ground game too. But in terms of yards per attempt, in terms of completion percentage, one of the best passing offenses in the country. And it's because of Julian, Julian on the season now up to 80.9% completions. It's so far ahead of the rest of the field. I talked about last week how the gap between him and second place is about the same as the gap between second place and like 40th. But I looked up some other stats the other night, or last night when I was writing about Julian, and if so, he completes 68.8% of his deep passes on the year. That throws 20 or more yards down the field. And if that were his overall completion percentage for the season, uh, it would rank in the top 20 in the country for overall completion percentage. That's throws 20 or more yards down the field. He's so accurate to all spots of the field, makes every throw in the game. The ball placement is elite, the pocket presence is elite. Everything he does is just at the highest level of quarterback play. Uh, and like you can sit there and say, and many have, that he has, two first round wide receivers that he's throwing to. But that argument, frankly, falls upon deaf ears for me because, like, sure, he has great players, but that doesn't make him any less of a great player. Like, I hate when guys get this detriment about, like, oh, you have great guys. It's not like Jeremiah and Carnell are out there, handing themselves the ball down the field. You have to still put the ball in the right spot. And his completion percentage, his ball placement, his accuracy are so far beyond what anyone else in the country is doing. Like when you look at the completion percentage, when you look at all of that data, I don't care who your receivers are. Like that is Heisman worthy. And he had the one interception yesterday, but he still threw for over 300 yards. To me, he's so far and away the best quarterback in college football that I think he's a clear Heisman pick.
I just looked
To
it
your
up
point,
because I was curious, and the gap now from second, if you it's so Julian Sayin has an 8.2 percentage lead over Carson Beck, who is in second. If you go 8.2 down from that to 64.5, you get to DJ Lagway, who got benched yesterday, who's in 55th in the FBS in completion percentage. So that is
Dang.
quite a gap from Julian Sayin to everyone else. His passer rating also now more than 14 points better than second place Fernando Mendoza.
wow. Yeah, and his performance, to Andy's point, yes, you
Yep.
can say that this Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate are the two best receivers in the country. But Ohio State didn't have Carnell Tate yesterday. They thought they were going to. I think we all thought they were going to because Carnell Tate didn't appear on the pregame status report. However, we learned that Carnell goes out for pregame warmups, experiences a little bit of tightness, and Ohio State chose to err on the side of caution and keep him out from this game, which they knew they could probably win pretty comfortably even without him on the field. That ended up proving true. But you may have wondered, is Jeremiah Smith in his success this season a product of also having Carnell Tate on the field? I think he proved pretty definitively with his performance that yes, it is great whenever he has Carnell Tate opposite of him, but he does not need Carnell Tate opposite of him to be the best wide receiver in college football. He had 10 catches for 137 yards and a touchdown in this game. His touchdown catch came on one of Julian Sayin's best throws of the season, where Sayin rolls out left in the pocket, plants his feet beautifully, delivers a strike over the middle of the field. But Jeremiah Smith is still in the running for the Heisman Trophy. For as much as there is Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza and Alabama's Ty Simpson, you have a case for Jeremiah Smith to win the Heisman. He has some work to do, but Dan, I do want to ask you, if you had to make a case for Jeremiah Smith right now to win the Heisman Trophy, what would that case be? And what are you looking to see from Jeremiah over the next 3 games, that could maybe establish his case even further?
He's the best player in college football. It's that simple. Like that's the case. Like I really believe he is the best player in the country. I believe he does things that no other player in college football does. I mean, you've seen it, the last couple of weeks. I mean, you think about one-handed catch that he had against Penn State. Yesterday there were, a couple of great catches on that first touchdown drive. One where he was basically pulled down by the defender, still makes the catch despite pass interference. A few plays later, he has a great contested catch at the 1 yard line to set up a touchdown run for CJ Donaldson. So, the guy proves it week in and week out. He's a special player. I think if you were, going around college football and, you had a draft and teams could draft any player, a lot of them would take Jeremiah Smith number 1 because the guy is just that good. Now, realistically, I think he's got an uphill battle to win the Heisman Trophy just because it is typically a quarterback-driven award. And if you're a receiver, unless you also play cornerback or a prolific kick and punt returner, it's hard to win the award. We did see Devontae Smith do it several years ago, but you look at his numbers from 2020 when he won the Heisman. He had 117 catches for 1,856 yards and 23 touchdowns in just 13 games. Jeremiah Smith's numbers are fantastic. 65 catches for 862 yards and 10 touchdowns. But they're not quite at that transcendent level in terms of productivity that he probably needs in order to win the Heisman. And, the irony of it somewhat is that the biggest reason why he probably won't win the Heisman is because of how good his quarterback is, So, I mean, they both go hand in hand. And, I thought it was cool yesterday. Andy wrote about it that after the game, Julian was asked who he thought should win the Heisman, and he said Jeremiah should win the Heisman. And Jeremiah was asked who should win the Heisman, and he said Julian should win the Heisman. So both of those guys know they are a big part in each other's success. And at the end of the day, the best news for Ohio State is they have 2 Heisman candidates. They have 2 of the best players in the country. We already knew Jeremiah Smith was that. Julian Sayin has proven he is that as well. And because of those 2, paired with Carnell Tate, paired with an elite defense, that's why we're talking about Ohio State being the number 1 team in college football.
Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith were definitely the bright spots of Ohio State's offense on Saturday. I also thought Bo Jackson and Isaiah West played really well at the running back position. Jackson had 14 carries for 75 yards, a long run of 14, while Isaiah West had 9 carries for 60 yards and a long run of 16. Neither of them scored the touchdown, though. I think we've well established at this point that CJ Donaldson is the vulture of touchdowns whenever Ohio State gets close to the goal line. He had 5 carries on Saturday, just for 12 yards, but also those 2 scores. So those were kind of the bright spots of the offense. Lincoln Keenholz also got in the end zone on a goal line package. But there does also seem to be a conversation around this team right now, one that fans are definitely invested in, and that is at the right guard position. Josh Padilla wasn't available for this game. Ryan Day said after the game that his injury is not expected to be long-term. They expect Padilla either to be back this week or at the latest next week as he works back from an injury that they have not disclosed to us what it is. However, if he were healthy, I imagine that there would have been opportunities for him to get into the game because of the way that Tegra Shabola performed at right guard. It's been a narrative building for, I guess, a few weeks here, but Tegra just didn't have his best game on Saturday against Purdue. It seemed like whenever there was missed assignment or whenever there was somebody that got beat on the offensive line, you were typically looking at number 77 on the right side there between Carson Hinsman and in this game, Ian Moore. Andy, I want to ask you particularly about Tegra. When Padilla is back, do we expect that Padilla is going to cut into Tegra's opportunities or maybe even overtake the role entirely? Or does Tegra Shabola still have something left to fight for in this position battle between him and Padilla?
Yeah, something left to fight for. Yes. What I expect to see and what I think should happen are probably 2 different things.
Sure.
What I expect to see, Josh played a career high snap count the last time he was healthy for a whole game. That was against Wisconsin. Obviously, Penn State, he gets hurt in the first half. Only plays the 1 series, really, like 8 snaps, I believe it was. He played 26 at Wisconsin. I think we see a continued, rather than it being like the 3rd series of the game or like every 3rd series where he's coming in for Tegra, like more of an even split where Josh is maybe even getting into the 30s in terms of snap count consistently. I think Josh should just be given a look as the full-time guy at this point. It's been me and Dan talked about it on After Carmen. Tegra has just not been to the Ohio State standard. And I think the most telling part of that is that they tried to play Gabe Van Sickle for a series because it was going so poorly, right? Like they still tried to rotate in this game. Gabe Van Sickle gets in for a series, and uh, I'm not sure how well he did. It's still some film I need to watch there, but the Tegra has still ended up playing 65 and 75 snaps, and it's just like there are moments you can immediately recall in your brain of like Tegra costing Ohio State on plays, his guy immediately, you know, blowing up a play that otherwise would have been a nice gain. Like there was a screen pass that he just stood there and didn't block anybody. Anytime there's a stunt in front of his face, he can't. He does not have the awareness to pick it up. It seems like whenever they're sending a creative pressure on the defensive front, whenever a guy twists, whenever someone slants down, he doesn't pass off the blocker and he misses the blitz pickup. Like it's those kinds of things where, um, yeah, and he's still getting beat at the line some too. Like there's just some whiffs. He has plays still where you see like why you might like him in terms of coaching staff. He's the most veteran seasoned part of this offensive line, 25 starts now, but because he's the most veteran seasoned part of this offensive line, he should be held to a higher standard than what he's been producing. And you have enough data to say, like, he is what he is at this point, especially this year. Like, maybe next offseason he can take some jump, but to me, I think Joshua Padilla has just been far more consistent when he's been in the game. I get maybe he doesn't have the size of Tegra. He is a year younger than Tegra, doesn't have Tegra's experience. Played a lot of center in the past. While the guard thing is kind of new for him this year, but I just think you've got to keep that competition open and give Padilla a real shot to earn the starting job this week because it just week after week it's just not consistent enough from Tegra.
Dan, is that something that you agree with?
In terms of Joshua Padilla should be the starter.
Yeah.
I would lean in that direction right now. I mean, it's hard because we haven't seen a big sample size of Josh Padilla yet. Like Andy said, like I'd like to see Joshua Padilla get a full-time opportunity. Now, the hard thing is it's like it's an inopportune time for him to get hurt because you've got 2 more games left now. Most likely, whether it's UCLA or Rutgers, they're not going to thrust him back into the lineup as a full-time starter in his first game back. So like that's what Ryan Day said. He hopes to have Joshua Padilla back this week. It'd be nice if he can come back next week, play some against UCLA. If he outperforms Tegra in that game, give him that full-time opportunity against Rutgers. Because then you get to Michigan, you get to the postseason, it becomes harder to experiment. Granted, Ohio State did do all right with a rotation at guard in the college football playoff last year. So, I agree with Andy that I think it's probably most likely we continue to see a rotation at right guard throughout the season. But I do think that, Tegra Shabola is not, for a guy who started 25 games, I mean, we're not talking about a guy who's a first-year starter. We're not talking about a guy who's still getting his feet wet. We're talking a guy who started every game dating back to the start of last season. And there just hasn't been enough improvement in some of those technical lapses that we've seen from him. And so I think because of that, his job should be very much up for grabs. I mean, even the way Ryan Day talked about it after the game, I mean, usually if Ryan Day gets asked about someone struggling, his go-to answer is going to be, I got to go back and watch the film. He acknowledged it in the moment that he saw it in the moment that Tegra had some struggles in the game. So I think that tells you right there that, his starting job is far from solidified, but the first order of business right now is Joshua Padilla has to get back healthy, and they're probably going to want to see him in more action before they go and make a permanent switch at that position.
Yeah, and I have that quote pulled up from Ryan Day on Tegra Shabola. It was Bill Landis who asked him the question, and it said that in his view, some of Tegra's inconsistencies had come back up. So Ryan Day said to that comment, to that question, I agree that the play was inconsistent because I watched it because I saw it. But then there was some other things that were good, but we need to grade out a champion here. That's for everybody. That's what the expectation is. And I think you take that comment as well and you marry it with one of the things that Ryan Day said on his radio show on Thursday. And that was, if you come to an Ohio State practice, Day said, you're going to see the best coach in the country. You're going to see the best 3-tech in the country. You're going to see the best assistant coaches in the country. You could go down the line, right? Of Ohio State wants to have the best player and the best staff at every single position. And we know that, Ohio State doesn't have the best player at every one of their positions across the board, but you would like to say that they're at least in the upper echelon. And I think what you're seeing in terms of Tegra's inconsistencies is that there are times when he is playing at a very high level. However, what you're seeing in his ceiling, you're also very often seeing in his floor. And so what Tegra would need to put on the field, in my opinion, is a more consistent effort. And even then, if you have a guy like Josh Padilla coming back who's hungry, who's desperate, who wants to get this position and these opportunities, I think you have to give him a fair look. I also think, too, with Dan's point about the college football playoff and this game that's coming around the corner, Ohio State only has the UCLA game and the Rutgers game before playing Michigan. If all goes according to plan, their next game there would be the Big Ten championship. Maybe if they win, they would certainly get the first round bye. Even if they were to lose to Indiana, there is a chance that they would get the first round bye. So they wouldn't have the benefit of a first round home playoff game like they did last year against Tennessee, where they got in control of that game so quickly that they were able to experiment with mixing in an Austin Sierraveld, mixing in a Luke Montgomery at those guard positions and having those guys rotate as frequently. They had some room to experiment with it. And I don't know, given Josh Padilla's injury timeline, if they're going to have much time to experiment before their most important game of the season against Michigan in Ann Arbor, and then the Big Ten championship and college football playoff beyond. The only other guy I want to talk about before we go to some Big Ten results is Jaden Fielding. Career high 49-yard field goal for Jaden Fielding in this game. He also converted a field goal from 45 yards. Dan, I want to go back to you. Jaden Fielding's been in this program for a long time. What does those kicks do for his confidence and for this special teams unit moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's big not just for him, but for the team, for the fan base, for everybody to see him make, 2 kicks of that distance. And, you talk about it was a cooler day, it's on natural grass outdoors. So, those were 2, really good kicks for Jaden Fielding to make. And, I think Jaden Fielding's a guy where, it's kind of like we were talking about offensive line. Kickers kind of the same way. People tend to remember the misses more than they remember the makes. And I think a lot of the narrative around him has been shaped by that Michigan game last year where he had 2 bad misses, was kicking with an injured hip. And I think he hasn't really had the opportunity to kind of shake that narrative because he hasn't been called upon to kick, that many long kicks. So I think, particularly that kick at the end of a half. I mean, Julian Sayin's drive there should not be overlooked either. I think it was 45 yards in 35 seconds. He does a fantastic job driving Ohio State into field goal range. And then you say, Ohio State basically orchestrated that to give Jaden that chance because they called their timeouts. They had the ball deep in their own, and they could have just run the clock out and gone into halftime. But they wanted to give Jaden Fielding that chance to make a field goal, give him a free score lead. And he goes for a free touchdown lead, I should say. And he delivers on that. So I think huge for Jaden Fielding for sure. Something that he can build on, especially as we get closer to that Michigan game, to the postseason game, where they may need him to make a big kick to win a game.
Doug Lesmerises had a pretty great tweet on Saturday as we transition here into the Big Ten scores. We as sports reporters, we maybe lean a little bit too much into hyperbole at times. Everything is the game of the year, the catch of the year. That guy won the Heisman with that drive. That was stuff that was coming out of the Indiana-Penn State game on Saturday, where number 2 Indiana beats Penn State 27-24. Some of the things that I just mentioned were true. Actually, just one of them. And that was that Omar Cooper Jr.'s catch, I think, is the catch of the year in college football. The way that he got up to get that football reminded me of Jackson Smith and Jigba's catch in 2020 against Nebraska when he caught the ball basically behind the end zone and extended his foot backwards to secure the touchdown. That's what won Indiana the game against Penn State on Saturday. However, I will dispute the claim that that was the game of the year in college football, as an Indiana team that improved to 10-0 downed a Penn State team that has now fallen to 3-6. And I will also dispute the claim that Fernando Mendoza, as Gus Johnson said on the call, has put the Heisman Trophy in his back pocket and can arrive in New York expecting to host the trophy. Andy, what do you think about those claims? I know you probably didn't get the chance, the both of you, to really watch the game really at all. Maybe you've seen highlights at this point because of the way that it was occurring during our Ohio State versus Purdue game. But what do you think about those claims, and what I guess is your overall takeaway from Indiana's result at Penn State?
Yeah, I did watch the last few plays of it. We had it on in the press box for a little bit. Some of us on our laptops during the second half of the Ohio State Purdue game because it kicked off an hour later, and so that game was kind of wrapping up as Ohio State Purdue was in the third quarter. Um, Yeah, saying Fernando Mendoza locked up the Heisman with that performance is absolutely ridiculous and one of the dumbest takes I've heard from like college football national media people this season. I'm sorry. Like, I get Gus Johnson in the moment; he's excited, whatever. That's fine. But to see like Dan Orlovsky going on Twitter, and part of it's probably trolling, right? Saying that Ty Simpson and Fernando Mendoza are clearly the two best quarterbacks in the country, or to see just any like of the Fox gobbledygook that's calling Fernando Mendoza like high Mendoza or whatever. Like, give me a break, man. He. The reason they needed a game-winning drive in the first place was in part because he sucked all day. Like, he didn't have a good game. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve Heisman consideration or to be a finalist alongside Julian or even still be in the running to win the thing. But to crown him the champion on a day when he goes 19 of 30 for 218, a touchdown, and a pick against the same defense that Julian went 20 of 23 for 316 and four tugs against with no picks. Like, come on, man. Compare them side by side. Why does the Heisman need to be built on these moments? These one individual like Heisman moment. I understand the narrative of that and like it's an iconic thing. Like Heisman moment is kind of baked into the fabric of what the Heisman Trophy is. But like that doesn't mean you have to manufacture it when the kid had one of his worst games of the year against a Penn State team that's been reeling all season. Yes, they still have talented players, but like Penn State was beaten and broken and well, they shouldn't have been in that game in the first place. And then because they were in that game and Mendoza leads a great final drive, like kudos to him. He did an amazing job that last drive, made up for his sucky performance the rest of the day. Um, that is now he's the Heisman. He's the best player in the country all of a sudden. Any context at all surrounding that last drive, like going back before that last drive, comparing what Julian did against Penn State, comparing what Ohio State did as a team led by Julian against Penn State. Like just because Ohio State hasn't had the opportunity to make a game-winning drive because they've been so dominant all year and Julian's been so consistent and hasn't had an off day to the point that they've had to, like they haven't had offense to that caliber. It's insane to me he gets punished for that in the eyes of some national media who just want to crown Mendoza the Heisman. And again, I get it from Gus Johnson in the moment because Gus is going to get excited and say those kinds of things. Honestly, the game-winning call was pretty funny because his voice is cracking like the Dickens.
He reached new octaves.
Yeah, I didn't know that man that had it in him, but yeah, he listen, yeah. So I get it from Gus in the moment. That's fine. Like you're trying to be excited as a broadcaster, but for the national media types, just to yeah, and it goes back to what I said earlier too. People want to discredit Julia because of how good his receivers are. Watch the film, watch the throws. You don't. I don't care if you've got Randy Moss and Julio Jones, roaming your sidelines. Like 81% completions is 81% completions, man. It's ridiculous. So Yeah, I needless to say, I do not agree with the Fernando Mendoza Heisman campaigns that are coming out of this game.
It's building storylines and it's building narratives, which I don't blame media types for doing. But it is kind of funny when you put it up against the backdrop that these two quarterbacks, Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza, are on a collision course for the Big Ten championship game. And it's not a guarantee that the winner of that game ends up winning the Heisman Trophy, but that's an opportunity for narratives and for storylines to build, right? Winning, whether or not this is fair, is a quarterback stat. And so whoever comes out on top in that game is going to not only get to maybe hoist the Big Ten championship trophy, but they will definitely have the lead on hoisting the Heisman Trophy as well. That wasn't the only big result in the Big Ten on Saturday. There was a quite an entertaining game with all things considered, under the lights, in the weather, a blackout opportunity, or at least a stadium heavily painted in black for Iowa and Oregon. This was a game that had all the narratives and storylines building it into it as well. Iowa under Kirk Ferentz it's just a star killer against ranked teams in November. It was 5-1 entering the game on Saturday. It had beaten Penn State, a top three, or I believe a top five Penn State team. It had beaten a top five Ohio State team. It had beaten a top five Michigan team. And so Oregon was the next potential victim on the list there for Iowa to knock off. However, Oregon is the one that comes away with a victory. They also had a spectacular game-winning drive organized by Dante Moore, who was a quarterback earlier in the year that was also involved in the Heisman conversation. But Oregon comes away from Kinnick Stadium with an 18-16 win. And this really, Dan, this kind of established Oregon as the number 3 team contending for a college football playoff spot. They had already really been there, but it kind of fortified them in that 3rd spot. And this was, for, I guess, in some ways, a college football playoff decider. You know, this eliminates Iowa. It puts Oregon and keeps them in contention for a spot. What did you get to take away from the game in any that you got to experience on Saturday?
Well, I think Andy wants to give Dante more of a Heisman after he went 13-21 for 112 yards and 1 interception. But
that throw, though, that throw on the last drive, that was one of the best throws I've seen this season from a quarterback. Delivered it
Heisman-worthy throw. Heisman-worthy throw.
Yeah,
handed the trophy.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to see much of a game other than the final field goal by Oregon. But certainly, you know, like you said, I think it was, in my mind, it was a battle to be the number 3 team in the Big Ten. Oregon going on the road, beating Iowa, does establish Oregon as the number 3 team in the conference right now. I think certainly by far the most likely team other than Ohio State and Indiana to make the college football playoff. You know, I mean, really, I think I'd say we're down to 5 teams now in the Big Ten that have a shot at making the CFP. The other 2 being USC and Michigan, who both have 2 losses. USC, they've got to go beat Iowa and Oregon in their next 2 games if they're going to make the college football playoff. If they do that, they'll probably make the college football playoff, but that's a tough road ahead for the Trojans. Michigan, of course, I don't think I really need to delineate what Michigan needs to do. They need to win out. That would mean beating Ohio State in the game at the end of the year. If they do that, Michigan will make the college football playoff. If they don't do that, they won't make the CFP because the rest of their resume is not particularly outstanding right now on their 7-2 record. So I think it is pretty clear right now. You know, Ohio State and Indiana, the top 2. I do now put Ohio State above Indiana in the Big Ten rankings because of what we saw the last 2 weeks of Ohio State pulling away, dominating Penn State in the second half versus Indiana needing that late comeback against Penn State. Yeah, Indiana had to go on the road to Penn State, but nevertheless, playing the same team in back-to-back weeks, Ohio State far more dominant. That, in my mind, does make Ohio State the top team in the Big Ten with just how consistently dominant it's been, followed by Indiana, and then followed by Oregon as that clear number 3 team.
You had seen, too, the way that the committee viewed Oregon in its release of the initial college football playoff rankings. They only have 1 loss, but they are the number 9 team going into this weekend. And the reason for that, the committee had shared, was because of its strength of schedule. They had not beaten a team. I believe the stat was they had not beaten a team that was above 500 to this point in the year.
Northwestern was the one they had beaten.
Northwestern was the one. And so of their 7 wins, that was it. Or yeah, at that point of their 7 wins, that was it. So if they lose this game to Iowa, you're approaching toward the end of the year. Do they have a quality win that the committee could have pointed to, even at 10-2, to get them into the playoff? So it's hard to understate how important this win was for Dan Lanning and the Ducks as they move forward for the rest of this season. And so the Big Ten is shaping out, and kind of all the pieces are falling into order, as Dan had mentioned, which should make for an entertaining final few weeks here. But as I mentioned earlier, it does seem now, based on records, but also based on perception, that Ohio State and Indiana are on a collision course for Indianapolis and the Big Ten championship game. But Ohio State is going to take it 1 week at a time. I think if anyone asked Ryan Day at the press conference on Tuesday, has he set his hotel room and number, and has he gotten his spot on the bus to travel over to Indianapolis, he would probably laugh and not answer the question because they're all focused on UCLA. But with our final few moments here in our episode of 11 Warriors Live, I do want to get to some questions from our forum. Some of our viewers and listeners submitted their questions ahead of time. I do want to direct anyone that's watching live to our YouTube and our Facebook chats. Please submit your questions. We'd love to talk about them here. But I will go to our first question coming from Glass City Buckeyes. With Ian Moore getting the start at right tackle, what's the story with Ethan Onyanwa? 3 seasons at Rice at right tackle, a season at left tackle, and a projected high draft pick in the NFL draft. Even had a draft analyst refer to him as a can't-miss prospect. Now he can't sniff the field in Columbus. Yeah, I want to ask you, what is going on with Ethan Onyanwa, and why haven't we seen him to this point in the season?
Yeah, I think he just hasn't been exactly what they thought he would be. And this is something you see. I mean, you see it around the country, with the transfer portal. It's not always a sure thing. Like, I know like Oregon, the example, they brought in Mekhi Hughes. A lot of people thought he was going to be one of the best running backs in the country coming over from Tulane. He took a red shirt for the year because he was like 5th on the running back depth chart. We've seen Ohio State before. I think the guy that's kind of come to mind to me when I thought about Ethan Onyanwa was Jahad Carter when he came to Ohio State a couple years ago out of Syracuse. I believe he was the number 1 ranked safety in the transfer portal. And he didn't play. He got beat out by, Malik Hartford, who's now gotten beat out by Jalen McClain at Ohio State. But, we've seen that, you have a guy like a Caleb Downs and you pretty much know, like, okay, this guy's going to come in. He's going to be a star. But most guys in the transfer portal are not like that. Most guys, there's a little bit of uncertainty and you're hoping they're going to be a certain thing, but you don't really know until they get on campus in practice. And I think you look at a guy who was playing at Rice where he wasn't facing guys like Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry every game. And now he's in practice at Ohio State, and they saw some issues in pass protection from the spring from preseason camp that made them concerned about whether he can really be a tackle to the Ohio State standard, like Andy talked about before with Tegra Shabola. So, we've seen him play some guard, did end up playing a series at right tackle on Saturday. And again, I haven't had a chance to go back, rewatch the game to really get a good feel of that. I know PFF graded him out pretty well. So going to have to go back and rewatch that series and see how he performed there. If he can give him some depth. I mean, I think in some ways, the more interesting thing though, is that he's not even in the equation right now at right guard, because we talked about the concerns there. He was rotating with Tegra at right guard at the start of the year. Then Joshua Padilla took that rollover. And like Andy said before, it was Gabe Van Sickle who took that rollover. Now, maybe that was partially because they needed Onyanwa as a backup tackle because Phillip Daniels didn't play. But either way, you're talking about a guy who, like Glass City Buckeye said, there was talk about he could be a 2nd, 3rd round pick when he came to Ohio State. And now it's like he doesn't have a spot on the field. And, unfortunately for him, you're talking about a guy who's a fifth-year senior. This is his last year of eligibility. So if he doesn't carve out a role here by the end of the season, is going to really hurt his NFL draft stock that he had coming in, because he hasn't been able to get on the field on a consistent basis this year. And so, I think it just goes back to with the transfer portal. You just don't know. Like Ohio State hit such a home run in the portal last year. Like Seth McLaughlin, when he came in, like there was a lot of uncertainty about how Seth McLaughlin would do. He ends up winning the Remington Trophy. I mean, Will Howard, there's a lot of uncertainty around Will Howard. He comes in and he leads them to a national championship. You just don't really know with the transfer portal. And that's one reason why Ohio State has preferred to recruit and develop primarily and use the transfer portal as a supplement rather than making the transfer portal like the main part of their roster building strategy. Because especially when you're taking a guy who played at the group of 5 level and you're bringing him up to the Big Ten level, it's no sure thing.
It's kind of one of those things too, where like NFL teams miss on prospects all the time, right? In the NFL draft, we do it every year. We look at, who are the home runs, who are the busts, and there are a lot of busts in the NFL draft, given their draft position and what the NFL teams choose those prospects to do. We can expect that there are going to be some players who don't live up to their potential at the college level as well, because it all, in a little bit, the way that the narrative shapes around a player is what kind of prospect were they coming out of high school? How have they performed given their prospect rating at their school? And then they enter into the transfer portal, and what kind of rating do they have when they commit to Ohio State? It's always fascinating to me during the transfer portal season when you look at a prospect who was rated as a 5-star coming out of high school, and then they enter into the transfer portal and all of a sudden they're a 4-star after 1 year at a college where they didn't really play. You're like, how do we lose the talent there? But it all is just an analysis of or I guess a scouting from a high school perspective that then builds into college expectations, that then builds into transfer portal expectations at programs. And so I think that there is bound to be some players that maybe don't live up to the potential that they have coming in. I do have another question, Andy, I want to ask from the Butcher. Great name on our forum. Asking about Ohio State's slow pace of play on offense. Do you think that this could come back to bite Ohio State, or do you think it's something that will be to their benefit down the stretch?
I'd lean more toward it being to their benefit. And I think, like, again, the focus, I've spoken about this before, the focus is on the fact that the game has been shortened by just the clock moving after first downs and some of the rule changes in recent years and kind of the way college football is played now. Teams also against Ohio State sometimes want to take the air out of the football and not put it back in the hands of what has been a line of great quarterbacks and wide receivers. But I think come back to bite Ohio State is it demands execution and efficiency. And sometimes the best way to have those things is to be methodical, is to really sit down and diagnose what a defense is trying to do to you, get the best play call in, make sure everything is operating at the highest possible level. And to Ohio State's credit in this game, like as slow as it was at times, as like methodical as it might have been, and as there were some drives that ended in disappointing ways. The 15 play drive that ends in a pick to start the second half, probably being the foremost of that. Ohio State, outside of when they were running out the clock, still scored on 6 of its 8 true possessions. So you exclude the one where they were running out the clock at the end of the game. 6 of their 8 possessions, they get points. And that's after the one drive that wasn't the only drive where they punted was the first drive of the game, which had the 70-yard touchdown run called back. So they ended up efficient, and they've been efficient doing this pace all year. So I lean that way, that it's going to continue to benefit them because it has benefited them for the rest of the season. However, like where it can come back to bite you is if you have a game where you have multiple lapses in execution that cost you drives. You end up punting 3 times, and now you're only getting 4 or 5 bites at the apple as an offense. The defense has an off day, maybe where it allows a few scores instead of only one score. And Now you're in a game all of a sudden, right? And I think the anxiety about that is, could it happen against Michigan, of course? Could it happen in the Big Ten title game, the CFP? Um, that's where Ohio State has to continue to execute and has to solve some of these offensive line and running game issues to ensure it's staying ahead of the chains, ensure when it plays some of the better defenses, because Purdue, like, they continue to have inconsistencies against running defenses that aren't that good. Penn State and Purdue do not have great run defenses. Purdue was 92nd in the country defending the run entering this game. That's why solving the running game is important. And I do think they're going to lean heavier on the pass when push comes to shove, if they need to in the bigger games, if the run game still isn't there. At least you would hope they do that. Obviously, last year it took a wake up call loss to Michigan to actually get them to do that in stretches. But they've shown that they're willing to lean on the pass game this year already. I think right now it's trying to tune up that run game, but um, to answer the question, I lean that it's a benefit to Ohio State and that it's what's worked all season, but it does teeter on that edge of, like, a few things go wrong, like several things go wrong, as is wont to happen in the crazy game of football. All of a sudden, you could be in a game where if you were playing with a higher tempo, maybe you get more bites at the apple on offense and have a better chance to gain separation.
Dan, I'm going to get us out of here on this one because I think it's a fun question, especially one to ask you as our most tenured member of the group. It's from Buckzilla1 in our forum. Would you consider Urban Meyer's tenure as the Buckeyes coach the golden age of Ohio State football? Or was that just the beginning? And is Ryan Day's tenure the true heart of the golden age of Ohio State football? What would you have to say to that question right now?
I don't know. I mean, ask me in like 2.5 months. I mean, if Ohio State goes back to back and wins national championship, I mean, that's going to be about as golden as it can get. So, I think it's hard to say because I mean, the thing about Ohio State is they've kind of had a very long golden age of college football. That's pretty much the envy of every other team of a sport. I mean, you think back to Woody Hayes and the decades of excellence that Ohio State had under his tenure. And then, you think about Jim Tressel coming in the early 2000s and, their dominance against Michigan, winning a national championship. And then Urban Meyer comes in and he even takes that to another level with his 7-0 against Michigan, winning another national championship. And now, Ryan Day getting Ohio State to the national championship. Obviously, there's still that Michigan question, but you take the Michigan question out of it. I mean, you're talking about a guy who has the best winning percentage in college football history, just a consistent level of dominance with Ohio State. So I think in my mind, I would look at Urban Meyer's tenure as Ohio State's coach as a very successful one. For me to call it the golden age of Ohio State football, I can't go there because there's been so many periods of greatness in Ohio State football. But for me to call that 7-year stretch the best in Ohio State football history, I mean, I look at some of the stretches they had under Woody Hayes, and I'd probably put those at the top right now. But what Ryan Day is doing right now at Ohio State, certainly if they finish this year the way that they're capable of, this era of Ohio State football certainly is going to be in the conversation for the greatest in college football history.
Yeah. And history is history, right? We can't rewrite it. But we can talk about it with a different lens. And I always look back to Ryan Day's first season as head coach here when he took the team to the college football playoff. They had the lead on Clemson. A couple of unfortunate calls don't go their way. And instead of playing LSU in the national championship that year, they have to watch it from home. 2020, they make it to the national championship. They play against Alabama. 2021, they missed the playoff, but back in 2022, they had the ball driving against a Georgia team that if they make that field goal, we can't say with certainty, but we could say with confidence that they would have beaten that TCU team in the national championship. And we're looking at Ryan Day being a multi-time national champion head coach. And he has them in a position again this year to make that not just something that we talk about hypothetically, but something that we can talk about in reality that he is a multi-time national champion head coach in college football. So we could be certainly entering into that age, but like Dan, I would take a few months to maybe pause before I officially answer that question as well. But that will do it for another episode of 11 Warriors Live. Again, Ohio State beats Purdue 34-10. They will face UCLA next Saturday under the lights at the Horseshoe. I am Chase Brown for Dan Hope and Andy Anders, and also for our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. Give them a visit at FB Central Ohio. We will be back next week to discuss the Buckeyes game against the Bruins and so much more. So thank you all, and we will